There we go.
See that? 8 years in law school, we can figure it out.
I'd like to bring to order the January 10th meeting of the Tiverton Town Council. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. Bell.
Council Shabbat. Present. Council Ryan. Present. Council Hilton.
Present.
Council DiMederos.
Present.
Council LeBeau.
Here.
Council Edwards is on his way, and Council Perry is absent.
Advertised public hearing, comprehensive community plan updates, proposed 2017 comprehensive community plan updates. I'd like to start by saying I'm going to run the meeting about 2 hours with a hard stop of around 9:30, hopefully before then. We have another meeting a week from Saturday. The way I'm going to conduct this is we will go through section by section with open comments from the community regarding each section. It'll be the most organized way to do this. And so that we don't get overwhelmed with all the suggestions, we will be doing it section by section. At this point, I'd like Peter to explain the process and any other comments he would like to make.
Sure. So right now you're having there's a public hearing on the readoption of the comprehensive plan. The state law requires every municipality to adopt a comprehensive plan, and then every 10 years you need to readopt it. The purpose of the comprehensive plan is essentially to give local municipalities local control over their land use and planning decisions. If you don't adopt a comprehensive plan and you don't readopt a comprehensive plan, it puts you in a position with the state where the state has more control and the town has less. So by adopting the plan, it states what the town's long-term goals are. There are certain required sections, and the comprehensive plan is broken down by those sections. And so this is the process where the town readopts it. It's been a public hearing for the planning board, and now there's going to be a public hearing for the council, and then ultimately a vote and a review by the state to see whether or not they'll accept this.
Okay. At this point, I'd like to review, and I'm going to do 3 sections. Section 1, 2, and 3, which is the introduction, the planning background, and the planning concept. I'd like to open up the public meeting regarding these 3 sections. Do any councilors want to make any comments on these 3 sections or any changes? Any public comment on section 1 through 3?
Susan Anderson, 1137 Main Road. In section 2.1, there's 2 corrections that need to be made. Section 2.1 in the 3rd paragraph, the historic development of this village hamlet needs to be more accurate, in line with the paragraph below it, on the other villages and hamlets within Tiverton. So I suggest that we add this sentence, before
To which paragraph, Susan?
2.1, 3rd paragraph,
Yep.
after the first sentence. I want to add, before the bridge, this served as a ferry crossing with a post office, blacksmith shop, a store, stables, and a tavern. And then I want you to change the beginning of the next sentence to, historic elements remaining in this area are.
Any comment from the council? And I think we have this.
Yeah, I'm just reading it into the record.
You all received something from Susan in front of you? So if
Actually, there
you,
were 2.
what?
2 things we got.
It's the smaller one.
It's the content one.
Yeah.
It's not the 17-page grammar one.
No, and
It's
that
the
one,
one-page.
and that one we will review, I don't think you have to,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, I'm not.
Because I was reading that saying, oh my
No, I'm
God,
not.
but yeah, we will review that. So it's spelled out right here, everyone see it? Any comments? Any comments from the audience regarding this?
Okay. And then the next one in this area, 2.1, the fourth paragraph, the fifth sentence, the village descriptions are inaccurate according to the historical documentation that I've researched. So this whole thing should be rewritten to say, these villages included a sawmill and grist mill, later replaced by a cotton and a woolen mill and a general store at Eagleville, a stone church on Stone Church Road, shipbuilding, fish factories and store at Bridgeport, a saw and grist mill, later replaced by a thread mill and ice house at Sin and Flesh Brook by the Gut, a stagecoach tavern, cider mill, post office, and general store at Bliss Four Corners, a windmill and tavern at Tiverton Four Corners, later followed by a church, a store, blacksmith, wheelwright shop, post office, library, and grist mill, and an ice house at Nonquit Pond.
So this paragraph will replace the one that's originally on here.
Yeah, yeah, this is what used to be in there. This is historically accurate now.
Any comments from the council? Any comments from the audience? Okay, thank you, Susan.
Madam President, at the beginning of the hearing, I neglected to draw a distinction between the different sections of the comp plan. There's some broader policy statements that give descriptions, and there's also what's labeled action items, goals, and objectives. Those are really where the rubber meets the road, and the really controlling aspects of that are the action items and the goals and objectives, so that if the public would like to see real substantive changes made to the comp plan, directing their comments to those specific areas would be beneficial.
Thank you. Any other public comment regarding section 1 through 3? Any other public comment regarding 1 through 3? Any council further comments?
Madam President, I do have a number of comments as it pertains to this document, but if it's all right with the council, I'll hold those till the end.
As you go through the sections, are you going to,
I mean, I would prefer to address the document as a whole,
okay.
if that's
Would you
all
like
right.
to do that now, or do you want to wait?
Wait, and I would rather hear what the input is from the public
Okay.
first before I
Okay.
make my comments.
Okay, section 4, natural and cultural resources. Any comments from the audience regarding section 4? Come on, Susan.
Okay, page 34, table 4-1. The date of the Thomas Osborne House should be circa 1790.
Okay.
That's page 31 of our revised document, right?
Yeah, I think, because I was looking at, yeah, it's page 31 on the revised document.
What should it be? So what was the date?
Table 4-1.
1790.
Yeah, it's,
1790.
I think, well, maybe, no, you're right, John, it's 31.
It's page 31 on this.
Yeah, it's page 31. I don't know which one you're looking at. The final one is this one. We, as a
Oh,
council,
sorry.
have
Yeah, yeah,
3
yeah.
different copies, but this is the one we're looking at right now.
All right, well,
Right,
it's table
right, Stu, this
it's
is the
table
last
4-1, whatever it is.
Okay.
Yes, it's 31. Yeah, sorry. I didn't redo my.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah, table 4-1.
Okay. comments from the audience regarding this? Do you have more?
Yeah, just a couple more on 4.5.
Okay.
And one of them is to add Action 21A.
I'm not following, yeah. 21A.
4.5.
Okay, wait a minute. I got it. 21,
Page 42.
yeah.
And
Wait a minute, I don't see 21. Oh, add 21.
add 21A. So you have Action 21, okay? And then we have a paragraph under that. I'm on page 42. And then the top of 43, you have a paragraph that starts Rhode Island law. Just before that paragraph, I want to add Action 21A to say, investigate the feasibility and benefits of historic district zoning in appropriate neighborhoods. Because this paragraph relates to that action. It doesn't relate to Action 21.
I'm losing you.
I want to add a new action before the paragraph that says Rhode Island law provides for historical area protection. And it talks about historical zoning ordinance. Before that paragraph, because that's going to be the paragraph underneath this new action item, 21A.
Okay.
That's going to say, investigate the feasibility and benefits of historic district zoning in appropriate neighborhoods. Because this paragraph refers to that.
Go ahead. Did you want to say something?
I'll wait till council comments on this section.
All right. Any council comments on this section?
Well,
You want to wait for the rest of what she's saying?
Susan has more of
Okay.
21, right? I mean, you want to,
Go ahead. Well, no, she actually has a 22. All right, go ahead, Susan. Go on with this section.
Okay, and then the action under, the paragraph under Action 22 should, let's see, wait a minute. We have the paragraph before Action 22, okay. The paragraph before Action 22 that talks about the Tiverton Historical Preservation Advisory Board was established by, that should be put under Action 21, has the first paragraph. So right now, it's the third paragraph under there. I want to move it to the first paragraph under there,
Why?
because it talks about what the Historic Preservation Advisory Board is. It just makes better sense. It's logical, more logical.
Okay. All right.
And those are my two in that section, that, in 4.
Any comments from the council?
I'd like to hear from Councilor Hilton.
Yeah, me too.
so I have two. I'll start with Susan's. So you're proposing to add an action, and not that this isn't part of the public hearing, but I would be curious, and I might be calling on Stu, because I think you worked on this section, yes? And while the action doesn't commit us to something, I'm curious but hang on a second, Susan, I'd like to, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask Stu. And I don't know if there are any other members who worked on that, whether or not this was discussed by either the planning board or the subcommittee on this, around this action item. It's not, it doesn't commit us to anything because it's just an investigatory thing. But as Peter pointed out, anything that's an action item or a policy is critically important. So was there discussion about this at the planning board or in the subcommittee for an action item like this?
Yeah, yes, I believe there was, and Gary served on that same committee, maybe one or two other people in this room. Barbara, did you serve on that committee? It's been a long time, but I think that the feeling on the part of the CPAC committee, the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee, subcommittee that worked on Element 4, Chapter 4, I think our feeling was we might be a little too premature making an action item calling for historic district zoning. We had just gone through an attempt to create historic district zoning at Four Corners, and it really wasn't, the merchants loved it, but the property owners were not quite ready for it, so we kind of felt it was premature. We discussed this also in the Historic Preservation Advisory Board, on which I serve and of which Susan is chair, and I certainly endorse all of her other, particularly her factual changes and her other suggestions for Element 4. I don't feel strongly one way or the other. But I feel that Tiverton might not quite be ready for historic district zoning.
But this is investigate feasibility of it.
Exactly.
Which we had already done at different points.
Yeah, but we'll probably do it again when we feel the time is right. I'd just like to say I really appreciate the great help that Susan Anderson gave the planning board throughout the process, finding little gremlins, not just typographical, but factual errors that she corrected, and you've seen a bit of that, so thank you, Susan.
I think my only comment is, and I understand that this is an investigate thing, although I think a little bit, it seems to me that it is in a broad way covered already under Action 21, and that gives that would give us the opportunity to, in fact, investigate the feasibility and benefits of historic district zoning as part of a pretty broad Action 21. So that's my only comment on that. I do have a question, though, and again, this is really for the planning board, on actions 4.5, 3, 5, and 6, which are all talking about LID, low-impact development.
Thank you, Susan.
And there's a reference to low-impact development in the land use section.
Yes.
But the language here is actually more directive than the language on LID in the land use section. So I have two questions. One, is this the best place for this? And if we're going to do it, should it be in the land use section? And secondly, is there a conflict between what appears to be less directive language in land use and more directive language here?
We did discuss this in our committee, and I spoke to Kevin Nelson at Statewide Planning about this, and I made the point in our committee. Gary actually questioned whether we needed 3 action items as opposed to just 1, and I said that Statewide Planning was very happy to have 3 because it underscored the importance of low-impact development. I feel very strongly about low-impact development being on the planning board. I think it's a great policy, and so we wanted to just call more attention to it and do a little bit more sort of public education about the benefits of low-impact development, which is a state-mandated policy. And it is, I did notice that it is in the land use chapter as just one action element. But again, statewide planning tells us that there's no problem, and Peter, correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, statewide planning tells me that they don't think there's a problem in some repetition, in some overlap between elements. That if it truly expresses the broad vision of the community, then you can have it in a couple of different elements. Is that correct, Peter?
That's correct. And a lot of these action items can fall under a number of different categories, and there's nothing wrong with just repeating the action item in several different places, so.
I think the one question I have about this is that the language, and that's okay. My question is that the language in the land use section is not as directive about adopting this as it is in the other section. It's a little conflicting, meaning in the land use section, it's kind of, it's not really, it doesn't have an action verb that says should adopt or do. It's sort of kind of consider, is that a conflict that we should resolve?
Well, it's, obviously there's some ambiguity if the language isn't the same, but if you wanted, you could actually, and I know you've worked on this more than I have, Stu, but you could just use the language that's in the action items in this section and just repeat them, if you think that would serve that purpose.
In the other, yeah.
I'm just trying to avoid a conflict where it's a kind of a directive in one section, and then in another section, it says, we should consider doing this.
It is, I'm surprised that statewide planning didn't question that in the land use, because they feel strongly that this is not discretionary on the part of municipalities. This is a state mandate. And there is a manual that developers are expected to observe. So, did I answer your question?
You did, thank you, Stu.
Madam President?
Councilor Edwards?
Thank you. I just have a question on action item number 3, as I'm rereading this again, where it says, the planning board should adopt regulations enabling the services of a professional design consultants to review master plans at the expense of the developer and assure consistency with the state's low-impact design, or low-impact development goals. Is that part of what the state mandate is, or is this something that's just stuck in there? Because I'm a little bit leery about putting in language into our comprehensive plan that's going to force developers to spend more money than they may not need to, especially if that's something that should be fulfilled by our administrative officer when we do hire one.
Can anyone answer that?
Well, it's not part of the state mandate to say who the expense should go to. This is kind of written so that the expense would go to the developer to assure consistency with the low-impact development goals. I would say that it's not uncommon to have the developer bear the expense of peer review when they're getting a land development project through. Especially with the larger projects. The master plan is only for large projects, and when you're doing a larger project, you can stand to make quite a substantial sum of money. So, comparatively, that's a policy question.
And I do have one additional question on that section. So the prior sentence where it talks about the planning board working with developers to promote the rural residential developments as the preferred type of development pattern, is that statement going to indicate that that'll apply to the entirety of the town or to a specific section of the town?
Yes.
And my question there is, we do have quite a bit of industrial and commercial land that we want to develop, and if the push from the comprehensive community plan is to push rural residential development, then, we're still going to come up shy of $1 billion in assessed property values we need to fix this town's finances.
Yeah. So the action item sentence itself is written to say that the planning board will work with developers to promote rural residential developments, and doesn't put a qualifier on there as where that should be, although it does qualify in the less developed areas in town. In the paragraph that follows, it mentions R60 and R80 districts. But with this action item, it's still not going to allow creation of residential developments in a business or industrial zone. So that would still be not permitted. But in residential zones where rural residential development would be permitted, it would state that it's encouraged, so that if a developer goes in front of the planning board and wants to do a rural residential development in a residential zone where it's allowed under the zoning ordinance, the planning board would have to look favorably on it, because the comprehensive plan requires it to look favorably.
So I guess the one comment, I was going to hold a lot of these comments till the end, but I might as well make it now, is that I'm a little concerned with the emphasis that this document places on rural residential development, and the lack of emphasis that this document places on economic development. And as everybody up here knows, we have a significant problem with revenues in this town and hindering our ability to bring in additional revenues in the form of assessed property value is only going to exacerbate the problem going forward. So I'm a little leery about anything that's going to push forward solely residential development and handcuff our ability to be able to expand commercial use in this town.
Madam President, I would like to see everything taken out, any financial information, any financial that you're looking, that the town's looking for, the comprehensive plan is looking for money and certain people to pay these fees and pay this money. I'd like to see all that stricken from this altogether. That should be handled on a basis on the project size. Now, I wouldn't like it to say in here whether the developer's going to pay this or pay that. That should be determined by the project as it comes in front of the planning board. They can determine that at that time. It shouldn't be inside of a comp plan, because that's going to scare, like John said, that's going to scare developers out of here. We're going to pass all these costs on, and we need commercial development. And this is going to scare them away, and I'd like to see it taken right out altogether. Anything that has to do with finances, let the planning board deal with that on a basis on what's going on, like the casino, like Longplex, any big project, do it there. Let's not state it in this document.
Madam President?
Is that just one,
Yep.
is that possible, Peter? To take the financial,
You could, I mean, it would always depend on the context, but there are probably places where you could strike that, certain language that you didn't agree with necessarily. But maybe the easier way to do that would be, maybe at the next public hearing that you have on the 20th, come back and have a list of the areas that you would like to see struck, and that it can be discussed with the council.
Right,
whether you
and
want to strike that language.
We do understand that the fees have to be paid, but I just don't want to see it in the document like this, because that's just not going to be, that's not business friendly, seeing that in a document like this.
Madam President?
yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm leery of making a general globalization about striking financing, so I'd rather go looking at each thing individually and saying, okay, it's okay here, because if a development comes in, they're gonna know they have to provide some stuff. I mean, I don't think that would be news to them. But the other thing, I don't know if you realize, we just tonight, it was handed out, the economic development packet, so that might be something in there that might answer some of your concerns. It might, my guess is it wouldn't answer all of them, but at least we just got it, so it's like it's not,
Yeah, so this will have to be discussed on the
yeah,
next
yeah,
meeting.
so some of that stuff, it might already be in here.
Any other council comments? Any other comments from the public on section 4?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Excuse my voice. I'm raising the issue.
Just state your name and address, even though we all know you, but just for the record.
Cecil Leonard, 500 Nick Road. My statement doesn't necessarily insert itself best in section 4. It could be in another section, section 7, for example. But my concern is that throughout the document, there are several references to the importance of groundwater. For example, on the copy that's on the website, it talks about ground and surface water. Since the lifeblood of the community, the drinking water supply, comes from resources within the town, the protection of those resources is of crucial importance, period. But nowhere could I find, it may be there, but I just couldn't find any specific plan, language, action plan to address the problem, to make sure that we preclude groundwater being exhausted by having too many wells drilled in a particular area. And this was really brought home to me during our recent drought, because down where I lived, there were not that many houses, but a couple of houses were built, and people in the area could see immediately an impact on their well. Now granted, that was in a drought year, but there may be somewhere in the plan some language about that, but I haven't seen it. But I think that's an important consideration, particularly given the fact that under statewide planning direction, we had to consider things like rising sea level, more warming, etc., that might indeed impact groundwater. So I understand there's another session on Saturday, so I'll continue to
Not
do
this
some...
Saturday, the following Saturday.
I'll continue to do some homework to see if I can find it, but I do want to raise that concern. Thank you very
Councilor
much.
Munson, would you?
Without getting too far ahead, there was a discussion about that. There is an action item, whether or not it needs to have more force behind it, but there is an action item, although it mixes water, wastewater, and actually fire suppression, in the land use section that says, review current allowable density regulations in all residential zones that allow a residential component and modify as necessary to ensure development is supportable by available water, wastewater, and fire suppression capacity. So if you review page 60 and then let us know what you think, that might be a starting point.
Which page 60?
Oh, sorry.
Page 60 on the website version?
How about this? How about land use action 15?
Okay,
If you look at land use action 15
Okay.
and then let us know what you think.
okay, I'll do that. But the language you cited is part of what concerns me, because throughout the whole document, we do recognize the importance of groundwater, but we keep mixing it up. We say we have to be concerned about the landfill, and we have to keep the monitoring wells, and we have to make sure that during construction, the contractors have to take preventative action to keep their sediment getting into the groundwater. But nowhere does it specifically say, look out, there's only so much water that's available. But anyway, I'll take a look at that, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Cecil.
Councilor Edwards?
Madam President, yeah, thank you. So under section 4, action item 14, I'd like to see that stricken, that entire section.
I gotta get there.
Sorry.
No, it's all right.
And the reason behind this is, it says that we want to continue to monitor potential leachate contamination from the Tiverton landfill, and this is something we're required to do by Rhode Island DEM, and as part of the landfill closure process, and we're already doing that. So I just don't really see the point in having it put into this document and being redundant, since the state's going to force us to do it anyways, and we're already doing it. And any quote-unquote potential leachate that may be coming out of the landfill, the only byproduct we've seen thus far is iron coming out of the ground that has nothing to do with the landfill itself.
Any comments?
So some of these things may be redundant with requirements in state law. It doesn't necessarily hurt to have that redundancy, because it could apply in contexts where you apply for grants, and oftentimes that's governed by what you have in your comp plan and what you prioritize in your comp plan. So if at some point in the future that was a priority, maybe you wanted to seek a grant for monitoring potential leachates, I don't know, but that would show that you made it a priority, and so it doesn't hurt necessarily to have redundancy, but it is something to consider.
Okay, and then to that end, if we are going to keep this section where it says in the second paragraph, closure of the landfill is anticipated to begin in 2020, we're actually doing that today, but the whole landfill itself shouldn't be closed before 2021. We've got like 3 years left in capacity, possibly more if we're lucky.
That is true. So change that to,
Could we change that to 2018?
Yeah, I mean,
Would that be accurate?
We actually
I think
started at 17 at the end.
Right, but
to begin in 2017. Counselor Hilton.
Yeah, I love trash.
Yeah, I know. Counselor Hilton.
To Counselor Edwards' point, and exactly what Peter brought up, there is EPA money available for things like this, and having this in our comprehensive plan would help us apply for it. I also think it's a good, even though the state requires us to do it, it's a good educational component of our comprehensive plan so that people do understand that, there is an issue there of monitoring materials that are in that landfill, so I'd like to keep it, actually.
Cecil?
Madam Chairman, if I may, a couple points. First, in terms of emphasis, let me say that those of us that live downstream from the landfill are probably considerably, in fact, I'll almost guarantee, we're considerably more concerned about what leaches out than the general population in town. The other point I would make, Councilor Edwards makes a good point in terms of there's now legislation, but from the perspective of someone who's been involved in government for many years, I've learned sometimes painfully that the General Assembly giveth and the General Assembly taketh awayeth. So there may be a DEM general statute requirement now, but that doesn't mean there will be tomorrow. And it's like I said, those of us around the landfill have a lot of sensitivity to that. Because obviously, the first time any kind of a pollutant shows up in a domestic well, you know darn well what's going to happen to the property value. It's going to disappear. Thank you.
Madam President,
Counselor Edwards?
if I could just respond to Mr. Leonard there, and to the general public as a whole, because this is something that we've been actively involved in with the landfill subcommittee. We are constantly monitoring what's coming out of the landfill, but the other item that makes me a little bit concerned about this is that we're putting the focus on the Tiverton landfill, and I'm also worried that we're going to be putting the emphasis on any potential problems that may arise down around the landfill area on the town, when we all know part of the property next door that they've been dumping stuff in the ground, and there's been issues there. And we also do have another unlined landfill that's on private property that has never been addressed. And so my concern here is that, by keeping this and specifically highlighting the Tiverton landfill and not looking at, the groundwater as a whole, that we're drawing attention just strictly to the town, and that could create potential problems for us in the future when it may not even be our fault. And the town may not be at fault for what's in the groundwater. I know everybody likes to blame the unlined landfill, but quite frankly, people have been living in Tiverton for hundreds of years and putting stuff in the ground that they probably shouldn't be. So it's not just the Tiverton landfill that was started in the 50s. It's potentially other items. Firestone's an example.
Peter, do you have any comment on that?
It's a policy consideration, what you want to emphasize and what you don't want to emphasize, so.
Any other comments? On four. On four.
I'm Patty Souza Cooper, 18 Beach, just to speak to that. I mean, maybe we just change the language to include that we're going to monitor leaching into the groundwater, period, to include the landfill. And just leave it there for that reason, in case the state says we don't need to anymore. We still have it as part of our plan, but our plan encompasses monitoring leaching into the groundwater. I don't know if we could do that.
Yeah, who's got music?
Everybody looks at Barbara.
It's the angels. It's the groundwater leaching angels.
Does anyone have music going, their cell phone going?
Probably Cameron.
Everybody can hear that, right? It's not. Barbara, you sure it's not you? It's coming from your area. Oh,
That's a riot.
Stop. No, it didn't.
Is it in that like that?
okay. Thank you, by the way.
Madam President, I would keep the landfill in, but the points that you made about the contamination in the other places, it's not mutually exclusive. And since Cecil already said, you know, we want to look at the groundwater stuff, I wouldn't just knock off I think it is important, but, you know, to your point, you know, we could add a couple of sentences to put, you know, and just include it both, the landfill and your point about the groundwater, but that, I think that was also, we're going to look at that for, in the landfill use, that page 60.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
So-
like for instance, we know the old Firestone landfill still hasn't been capped. So,
Yeah.
you know,
But that-
something could happen on the
Yep.
backside of the landfill, which may have nothing to do with us.
Right.
It may be coming out of the old Firestone. I mean, we know that there's issues with the soil on Smitty's property, so.
Well, yeah, no, I think your point was well taken. I'm just saying, I wouldn't just de-emphasize that, but bring in the other one as well, because use that as a say, okay, let's look at the other groundwater in the town. I think that is a relevant
Yeah, I'm
issue.
concerned with putting undue liability on the town of Tiverton.
Right.
And I want to come up and support Councilor Edwards in terms of, I was speaking very narrowly of the south part down around the landfill, but as some of my fellow residents, I'm sure will point out to me at the first opportunity, there are parts of Tiverton, in fact, goodly numbers of Tiverton residences not down south that rely on wells. So I would like to support Councilor Edwards in terms of broadening beyond that, because who knows, you know, think of Bay Street,
It's another example.
yes. So, to all those folks that have wells other than down around the landfill, I wanted to support your thought in that area.
Thank you. Councilor Hilton.
So, in that case, I might suggest, if you read action item 11, it pretty much says that, but the language that goes with that is really just focused on underground storage tanks. So maybe what we need to do, because action 11 does actually do that, maybe what we need to do is add more descriptive language for action 11 to discuss more than underground storage tanks and the shipment of hazardous materials to cover those other properties. Stu's sort of nodding. Does that sound like an okay idea?
I think that's an excellent suggestion, that we don't just focus on underground storage tanks, but that we broaden it out to include other sources of groundwater contamination and subsurface contamination. I'd be happy to help craft some language on that.
I'm gonna write your name right next to this. Stu's going to
I already
do
did.
this. Stu is doing this.
I wrote Stu.
Madam President?
Yes.
And continuing along Councilor Hilton's line of thinking, I mean, not just underground storage contaminants, but what is the impact on the groundwater supply and also some of the river water supply from the local farms, which may be using nutrients that could be, you know, negatively impacting the river and some of our local water, you know. I mean, it kind of goes on and on and on, and if we're going to point at one, I think we should point at them all.
Any other comments from the public on section 4? Council? Of course, we will come back to all these sections at the next meeting, but to what changes we decided to make, but. Section 5, Tiverton Comprehensive Community Plan 2017, draft land use. Any comments from the public?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Attorney Karen Browning. I'm from Moses Ryan in Providence, Rhode Island. We have some comments on Action 7 at page 63.
I'm not there yet.
You said Section 5?
Section 5, Action 7, you said?
Yep.
I'm sorry. Oh. I don't realize that.
I'm sorry, could you tell us where you're from again?
Yes, I'm from the law firm of Moses Alfonso Ryan in Providence, Rhode Island.
And who do you work for? Is there a reason why you're here?
Yes, I have a client.
And who is your client?
The client is James T. McGinnis, as trustee of property owned on Suzie Road.
I just want to make that public. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so action 7.
Yes.
Okay.
So this action item sets forth that the property owned by my client would be subject to a study committee. The committee would be charged with 2 goals. One, to set forth what the zoning would be, and one, to decide what's best. We do understand after reviewing the draft that this is the only property that's designated in this way to be subject to a study committee. We believe that this would put an indefinite hold on any development at the property. We also have a couple of legal concerns. We believe that it's improper for the town to delegate comprehensive plan responsibilities to a study committee that's not yet formed. Even if these responsibilities could be delegated, it is likely that such a committee would lack any authority to do this work. Under state law, the planning board has the sole responsibility for performing all acts necessary to prepare the comprehensive plan. We understand that the town has concerns about developing this property in a commercial fashion. But the purpose of all of the work that's going on here and now with regard to the comprehensive plan is to identify just that, what is going to happen with the property. Putting this off to a study committee puts this property owner in a very difficult position. It's essentially a state of limbo. And since this is the only property designated in this way, in this draft, we believe that this is improper. Now, there is a land development process here in Tiverton. This particular property has gone through it a few times in the last few years. I was very much a part of the last time it went through. That process works. That process involves review, not only by planning, not only by town officials, but by experts on the applicant side, on the town side, peer review, engineers. That, we believe, is your study committee. If the town cannot decide at this point what to do at the property owner should be left to the land development process. We're requesting that action item 7, delegating this property to a study committee, be removed. Yes.
Stu, would you like to make a comment regarding actions? Is that all right?
I wanted to hear from the solicitor.
Well,
I'd like to hear from Peter first.
well, I would like to know why this is here.
I would like to know as well.
That's why I wanted to see what the planning board had in mind here.
Okay.
And then we'll ask Peter if, is that all right with you guys?
Yeah, that's fine.
I just wanted to know the thought process.
I was not the editor of this particular chapter, but the planning board did discuss this, and we felt that that 2 major developers had come before the town, New England Development back 12 years or so ago, and more recently the Carpianato Group, to put large projects, commercial and mixed commercial, in that area, which, but by the way, is not just Mr. McGinnis's 44 acres, but includes other owners that abut that. And we felt that it might be wise for the stakeholders, not just the planning board, but the town-wide stakeholders, to get together and sit down and say, you know, what would be good in this general neighborhood? How should this general neighborhood be zoned? Remember, it was originally zoned highway commercial. That was before NED, that was before New England Development. After New England Development, the zoning was changed by the then planning board, I didn't serve on it, to R40, I believe. And it's still R40. And so any owner in that R40 zone can do anything that's permitted under R40. But we felt that it would be best to step back and let a broad group of stakeholders get together and really take a look at that neighborhood, see where it's going. A lot of changes are taking place in that neighborhood. Longplex was mentioned a few minutes ago. That's a good example of one of the new amenities, a very attractive amenity in that neighborhood. And the reason is that we spent a lot of time on the planning board with Carpianato, working hard to make that project work. And we on the planning board approved the master plan with conditions. I actually made the motion to approve the master plan. The planning board didn't shoot down the mixed-use Carpianato project. It was the town council who did. And so we felt that, why go through this process again if we're going to come up with the same stone wall? We need to get everybody together and kind of have a better planning process for this area, which might very well include significant commercial, because this is the one part of town where Route 24 intersects with Fish Road, and it's the one place in town we think that maybe that kind of commercial development would make sense. People coming on and off the highway without traveling long distances in Tiverton. So we're not anti-development, if that's the concern of Mr. McGinnis, at all. We've, in fact, thought that a study group taking a look at this particular area, and by the way, it's not unique. There are actually 3 study areas in the comp plan. So we felt it would actually help everybody. It would help potential developers so that they would know that the town may actually be receptive. Right now, anybody would probably be very reluctant to come before the planning board, figuring that they go through the huge, long, expensive planning board process only to have the development killed at town council level. Did I answer that question properly?
Yes, thank you, Stu.
So I'd just make a couple of points. Action item 7, it's not about any particular development or any particular property. Like Stu pointed out, it's broader than any particular one parcel of land. I know that Ms. Browning represents a client that has gone through a development process before. They're currently involved in litigation with the town, so it would be appropriate for the council to direct their comments more generally and not comments about that particular development, because it is currently in litigation brought by Ms. Browning's firm. But I would say that it's not uncommon to use study committees to look at different areas. And if you do have a study committee in your comp plan, it doesn't put on hold any development in that area. There still would be controlled by the zoning in that area. And I believe this area is R40 at the time, so anything that can be built in an R40 can be built in that area, and the study committee wouldn't stop that.
Wouldn't stop that. Councilor Hilton?
I'd like to speak to this one. I was on the land use subcommittee, and I'd just like to explain the background behind this. When we were working on the comprehensive plan, at the same time, the Carpianato proposal was happening. So we were directed from the get-go on the comprehensive community plan committee not to discuss Sousa Road or anything that was happening in that area, because the assumption was that however that was resolved, it would be resolved before we were finished. Eventually, as the town council declined to go forward, and one of the things that we were left with on the comprehensive plan were all of the comments and all of the public comments that were made during the Carpianato proposal hearings. And it occurred to us as we read through all of these documents, and it wasn't just about this property, by the way, it was as it says in here, the Sousa Road area, which encompasses more than one person's property. there were a lot of people, when they spoke at those public hearings, that said one of two things. First of all, a lot of people said, I'm okay with something here, not just this. They didn't say what the something was, but they said they were okay with something there. And the second thing that we heard over and over again is, why is it that every time we have to make a decision when there's a proposal looming, why can't we think about what to do in this area when there isn't necessarily a proposal looming? So the Community Comprehensive Plan Committee decided to suggest the creation of a study area, or a study group. That study group would not make the zoning, only the planning board can do that. But the idea was to bring all the constituents together and do something on more of a grassroots, bottom-up basis. We've done it before. We did it with the Main Road and Bliss Four Corners things where there were design charrettes and the public got to participate before the planning board took it up. We did it with Grinnell's Beach. We've done it in other places. So the idea was, if folks said at the hearing, which they did say, we're okay with something there, okay, let's try and find out what it is that people are okay with, and give the citizens a chance to participate in a discussion about what we might see eventually in Sousa Road. So, but it was not certainly to usurp the planning board or ultimately the council's decision-making authority on all of this, but to start it from a grassroots, let's get folks involved in a bigger discussion about this and see what people would be comfortable with first. That's really all this was meant to do, in the hope that, everybody could come to some sort of agreement and we could move forward.
Could I respond? Oh, sorry.
It's very odd because I find myself agreeing with somebody who's currently suing the town, but I think we should strike action item 7 altogether. I think any specific reference to this area could create additional problems, and moreover, I think more importantly than that, we should have a deep dive into how the switch from highway commercial to R40 zone happened in the midst of a commercial development proposal.
Just be careful.
So I think that we need to look at our zoning as a whole and not highlight a specific area. And as it pertains to the rest of the land use, I've noticed that in this proposal, we're breaking up commercial areas into little subsets of other commercial areas, such as village commercial and main road commercial and this commercial and that commercial. And quite frankly, it feels like we're trying to over-regulate something with quote-unquote guidelines rather than actual standards. And that's part of my problem with this document as a whole, is that we're not putting forward standards that can be adhered to. We're putting forward gray guidelines, which affords a crazy amount of power to the planning board to be able to point to one specific item, to drag out development, and to, by and large, hurt the tax rolls for the town of Tiverton, when, as I'll say again, we're $1 billion short in assessed property value in this town to be where we need to be financially.
Could I respond? So our position is not that the town is against land development. Our position right now on this action item is that we're against being put in a state of limbo. We're against being put under the scrutiny and being subject to a committee, a study committee, which in our opinion would have no legal authority. It would be virtually impossible for us to go forward with any application, because in our opinion, it would be almost or very, very difficult for any decision-making body in the town to find consistency with the comprehensive plan when a study committee hasn't finished. Now, at the end of your comp plan, you have a list of items and timelines. And one of the items in here has to do with this action item, and it says that you have 3 years just to appoint the study committee. Now, that doesn't talk about meetings, deadlines, anything beyond that.
But that doesn't stop development that's allowed on that area under R40.
Under R40, correct. That would be the zoning issue. We're talking about the comp plan. What would happen on the comp plan side is we would have to get a comp plan change. But we don't even know what we would be changing because the study committee wouldn't have been able to designate what was happening at the property. That could take years.
So you wouldn't need a comp plan change if you developed under the current zoning.
Right.
Because
Correct, but what you're saying by this action item is that you don't even know what you want at the property. And I want to point out that action item 7 is very specific to this property. It says, Sousa Road, which connects Main Road with Fish Road, has been the center of 3 rezoning development proposals over the last 10 years. It goes on. There's no question that this action item is specific to this property owned by Mr. McGinnis.
Madam President, how do we go about changing this so it's not, or I should ask the attorney, how can we change, instead of strike the whole thing, which I agree with John, we can strike it, but it doesn't seem like that's like the goal here right now is to strike this, but let's get Sousa Road out of there, let's get McGinnis off this, his property off this, all this. We're picking on one group of people in a comp plan. That's not what we're here to do. This comp plan is not to pick on a development or an area. So I agree, maybe something needs to be done on Sousa Road, something needs to be done with the McGinnis property, because there was crazy changes going on from this zone to that zone. So if we don't strike this out of here, then this whole comp plan is nothing but, it's just, it's not going to do anything for the town. It's messing the town up. So we need to, it needs to be based on the whole town in general, not just a property, because we didn't like what was going to go there. And that's where we're leaning towards. I'm just
So just to clarify, if action item number 7 was struck, then the area that Ms. Browning is talking about would just stay
Be
R40.
It doesn't really,
But the action item number 7 was saying that, there's been discussion about in that area maybe doing something else, so that would just give the town a vehicle to get a recommendation from whoever they decided to get a recommendation.
does it have to be in the comp plan, though?
Doesn't have to be in the comp plan, they could do it without going in the comp plan. And
Like, it
wouldn't
could be a
prevent-
study group without putting it in the comp plan.
Yep.
And keeping that at R4.
You could, and it wouldn't, it also, whether you have it in the comp plan or not, it wouldn't stop someone from making an application that asks for a zone change. It wouldn't stop someone from making an application that asks for a comp plan amendment. That can all happen. All this says is that a group of people will advise you regarding, one particular area of land. Whether you want that advice or whether you want that advice in the comp plan, it's up to you. But I don't think this is targeted toward any particular individual. And more importantly, I don't think this provides any stumbling block to any particular individual.
Well, it's kind of,
because just a study.
it's specific to that property, though. Let's get the specificness out of there. If you want to put something in there, have it for the whole town. We're picking on one group of people, one property. Let's not pick on a property. Keep that R40, or whatever it is, R80, and let them deal with a change through the zoning. If they want a zoning change, go back to zoning and get a change. We can't put in the comp plan. Next thing we're going to put in the comp plan, maybe not this time, next time somebody's going to want some other, I don't know, somebody's not going to like a horse farm at somewhere, and they're going to say, well, we don't want that there either. Well, let's go with that. We're opening up a can of worms. Let's have a comp plan that actually does its job, instead of picking and assembling one group of people out of something. That's my opinion on it. I mean, I don't know if it belongs here. Keep it R8, R40. If they want to do something with it, let them go to zoning.
I might be able to shed some light on that.
Just 1 second for a minute. Taking it out would not make really much of a difference. And if we decided I just don't understand what taking it out would harm.
So if you took
Because they have to do
Yep,
what it's zoned for.
yep.
We're just trying to think of different ways to make that better, I think, for the land, so that people know what we have in mind, but
Yeah, so if you keep it in, essentially that would require you to take another look and decide, well, could something else go there? If you take it out, you don't have to take another look. You can
It's
just
just-
keep it or do whatever you want.
it's just R40, and that's what's it stays R40.
And that's the point the exact point I was going to make. It stays R40 and it doesn't stop us. We still have to abide by the land development process. We still have to go through all of that review.
Right.
It's a policy question of whether you want to have
a study done or not have a study done?
We can't hire a planner, never mind a study on one piece of property.
Second.
Are you seconding that motion? All right, so that'll be something that we'll talk about on Saturday.
Can I just, I'm sorry.
No, I'm going to ask for more public comment, but someone else on the council wanted to say something, no?
I did,
Oh, go
Madam
ahead,
President.
Christine.
Just, you're going to believe what you're going to believe. Some people say it's one property, some people say it's not. So it's clearly, the attorneys are saying something, you're saying it's not one property, they're saying it is one property. Council is saying it is one property, other councilors are saying it's not one property. And it's like, you're going to believe what you're going to believe. So, but to say one thing as a fact, I think you recognize that people are looking at things differently. And your own opinion is one opinion, that's it. I just don't want to see it as facts, that, this is a fact, when it's not necessarily, and people don't even agree to it.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public?
Patty Souza Cooper again. So it is a sticking point, we all know. We all went through it. We all know what we went through. And I agree, I think that what's to harm, I think taking it out is going to put us right back in the situation where if something big wants to come in, we're right back where we started. We don't have anything to fall back on. Why can't we just make the language speak to all R40, all R zones, whatever it is? I don't know, I'm not good at that, but why can't we just make the language speak to all of it, so it's not a particular area? Whether you believe that particular area is the McGinnis property, or whether you believe that particular area is Souza Road property, however you see it, whatever your opinion is, why can't we just change the language to speak to if someone wants to develop beyond, outside of what the guidelines for the zoning is right now, then a study committee will be formed to decide if that's proper. Well, can't we make the language speak to the whole town? Can't we?
No, that would be, there is a process for that right now. If somebody wanted to come and put something there that it's not zoned for, there is a tiring process for that.
So what makes this property different from that?
I don't know. The only thing that makes this property different is that there's been developers interested in it. And there's been developers who wanted to put things on there that it wasn't zoned for. So, but it's zoned at R40. So what you were talking about is changing the zoning all over town then? Like
No.
a committee to look at all the zoning
Just
again.
that if somebody wanted to do something
There is a
and just
process.
make it not
There is a
specific.
process.
Right, there's a process. Have that in the plan, not have it be specific to
I
the
don't even
Souza
think it
Road.
has to be because it's already a
You have to-
process.
Under the law, you have to have a process for someone to.
So then taking this out wouldn't hurt anything then, because it's already there.
The process is already there. And that's what the public hearing is for, quite frankly, is so that the public can come to us and say, this isn't what we want there. And that's why the town council did what they did last
Okay.
time. That, in a way, is better than a study group, because you have everyone here telling you, I mean, that public hearing went on for,
It did, and I think,
A lifetime,
like, can't we
2-3
put
nights.
some language into the comprehensive plan to sort of preempt anything like that? Because it
no.
really did.
I don't think we can, because of the laws.
All right.
I mean, I'll be a little curious to hear what the public has to say about this. I mean, if people want to take it out, we can take it out, and the land can stay R40, and that'll be it. Again, this was an attempt, based on the comments at the public hearing, to say, rather than, and it actually is the third time, because our one-time town planner actually came up with a proposal that, having been through 3 kinds of proposals of some or multiple properties in that area, an attempt to find a way for it, but, if people want to take it out and leave it at R40, then.
I mean, I'd like to see some language that does protect us in some way to give us it, but does it need to be specific to that area? Does it, I
To
don't,
protect you from what, though? That's
just to give us an option for examining like Patricia's saying, we'll go forward and we'll look at it before anything comes up, let's decide what we're doing with areas, not just Sousa Road, the riverfront, wherever we're talking, before something.
So maybe this will help a little bit, and Peter can correct me if I'm overstating here. The land use section in your comprehensive plan, that's exactly what that does under the state law. And you have sort of two choices with things. One is you can state something really specifically and say you're going to do it. So you could say, for example, and I'm making this up, I'm not saying that we're going to do this. We're going to take a whole stretch of land that's now on Stafford Road that's zoned residential, and we're going to rezone that to commercial, and we're going to do it. And you put it in your comprehensive plan as a directive. And once you do that, you have 18 months under the law to do it. It's done. But then there are other things where you don't want to make that decision, you want to consider it. You want to say, we've thought about this, we're not ready to make that step, but we want to review it, evaluate it, or consider it. And most of those things get sent in the comp plan to the planning board for them to say, it's basically a directive. Please take a look at this and see if we can do better. This one particular item, because of its history, and again, it's multiple pieces of property down there, the thought was that to do it from the ground up before it went to the planning board, to try and build some grassroots kind of agreement. If people don't want to do that, that's okay. We just thought this area, not one property, but this whole area, given how contentious it had been, that maybe a grassroots approach would be more successful. That was the idea behind doing this. But what you're asking for in general is exactly what Section 5 in the land use plan does in your comprehensive plan. That's supposed to be your planning for how you're going forward in the future.
And and then I'll let you, and it doesn't stop, this still wouldn't stop any developer from coming in and wanting to do something else there. They still have to go through the whole process.
Okay.
Am I right? So say we say this is what we want here, well, they could still have a developer that wants to do something else. If it's within that R40, they can do it.
Do we need this in the comprehensive plan in order to start at the grassroots level and do some study committees to decide what would be the best option for that area? Do we need it in the comprehensive plan, or can we just do that?
Well, the council would have to decide if they wanted to do that.
Yeah, I'd say if it's in the comp plan, then you will have to do it. If it's not in the comp plan, you can decide to do it, but you wouldn't.
As a count.
Okay, so then
Although the one trade-off would be that if it's not, I'm just saying, if it's not in the comprehensive plan, and somebody comes in and wants to do something that's not in the comprehensive plan, there's a stronger argument that says,
there's no reason why it can't be done. Yeah.
This isn't in the comprehensive
Okay.
plan. I mean, that was part
Yeah.
of what happened before.
So
right?
let's leave it in.
So,
Yeah, so let's leave it there.
But also,
Take it out. Take it out. Take it out is really what you want to do.
but just the last time that you can also make an application where a developer will actually propose you amend the comprehensive plan.
Right.
So at any point, a developer can come and say, you know what, I want to do something, and it's not stated in the comprehensive plan, but I want to amend the comprehensive plan.
Right.
And then amend the zoning so that they could even ask for that too, so that,
And in this case, as with the last go-around, trying to develop that property, that's exactly what happened. We had to propose a zone change and a comprehensive plan change. So we would anticipate, given there's no plan right now, but should there be in the future, I would anticipate that we would have to seek both of those things at that time anyway.
and you could do that at any point,
Whether this is here or
in
not.
Or not.
Well, that's not correct. If it's in, what are we changing? It's
Right.
basically, there's nothing to change because the study committee wouldn't have decided yet. The study committee may not even be assembled yet. This could go on for years, putting us in limbo.
That still doesn't stop the planning board from
Yeah.
going forward with the process that's
Well,
in place.
I would argue it would stop them, because what would happen is, as part of the findings of fact on any application, they have to find that the project proposed is consistent with the comp plan. How do you find something's consistent when a study committee hasn't told you what you want. So it becomes very problematic on that sense, the limbo sense. But the greater concern, the legal concern, is that I'm not clear, and I'm unwilling to say that appointing a study committee, when the sole responsibility for the comp plan lies in the planning board, you're trying to delegate that authority to a committee that doesn't have legal authority to do it. Any action by that committee to put something in your comp plan outside of this comprehensive plan process is really, really a problem. Not to mention, you have to update your comp plan so many years anyway. If it comes out now, you want to study it between now and the next comp plan update, go ahead, put it in at the next one when you know, when a study committee has decided.
So, just a couple of points. If you have a study committee, it would just be advisory to the planning board. And the planning board has the authority to basically get this together and hand it to you to vote on. But they get advice from all sorts of groups, and they can get advice from a study committee or from a hired consultant or any other person. The second point is that if a proposal was brought under the current zoning and met the zoning requirements, that proposal could go through, and then barring some other violation of the town code, it would be approved with certain conditions. So in the R40 zone, if they met zoning and an R40 project was proposed, the planning board couldn't, based on action item 7, say, we're going to deny it, because you still have approved zoning for that area. And also, if an application was to come in either requesting a zone change and a comp plan change, well, at that point, it would be basically a legislative decision for the council to make, whether you want to make that. And you could ask for it at any point. Any developer could go at any point and say, here's what I would like it to read. Will you amend this way, to read this way?
But they're standing here right now asking us not to put it in. The property owner of most of that property, so let's just strike it and let them have their R40 and deal with it when the time comes. They're asking right now for it. Why have to go through a change? They're asking, don't put it in, so we won't put it in. Give them their R40. We're no worse for the wear.
That's up to the council.
I like that idea. Madam President? I just want to add to what Councilor LeBeau said, and I think part of the issue here for me is where it says in paragraph 3, a common theme was the desire that development and zoning decisions for this area should come from the community itself. And while I may want to, tell Randy what he can do on his property, I would be remiss, if under, property rights in this country, that I can force him to do something. And I tend to agree with what the attorney says, that this is creating a process by which a group of people can come together with zero stake in that specific area that's already zoned R40 and tell them what they want to do in that position. And if the community feels that something should go in that position, I would encourage them to reach out and contact the land and property owner and give them the suggestion. And if they think it's a good idea going forward, then they can pursue it.
Or buy it.
Yeah, or buy it. But I would say that, we don't want to, I'm afraid of putting something in here where people are going to be given a position of power to tell a property owner what they think they should be doing on their own property. And to me, that's how this reads.
And it's going to open up a giant can of worms, especially on Brayton Road.
Anyone else in the audience like to make a comment?
Peter Monis, 83 Captain Circle. I just want to make some quick points. I'm making a political statement. I think this section 7 should be dropped completely. Basically, down the road, it's going to be an obstacle to anybody that wants to develop that. It's not set to the study committee's ideas. It's going to be a barricade. The points of changing zoning, it's happening so many times. You change it quickly for the casino. Town council way back when Louise Durfee was on council, I believe she was there, she eliminated commercial zoning on that property, and the town changed that, and that was a bad idea. There was no study done, that's for sure. It was just done to block special interests. Unfortunately, the comprehensive plan becomes a special interest booklet for certain people. So it will become an obstacle down the road. There was a study already done in this area, and it was a town center study, which was very intensive, and it was well-liked, and yet nobody did anything on it. Just blew out, I guess, some money that time for it, and it would have been a good project for this town to have a town center, a village center, and it was abandoned. And the town planning board can set up its own self to do some studies on this area alone without dictated in the comp plan, because it's a Bible. Some people use it for a Bible. Oh, it's there, we can't do it because it's there. You gotta do this first, you can't do that. So, but they can set up subcommittees or study that area themselves and come up with some good ideas for the development of that area. So I'm against the Action 7.
Thank you, Peter. Anyone else from the audience? Anyone else in the audience on anything in Section 5? Any comments or questions from the council?
Madam President?
Yes.
Action item 11, review and consider amending the watershed protection overlay district zoning regulations to provide enhanced protection to ground and surface waters. Really a question for clarification, where it says Tiverton is responsible for 2 public drinking water reservoirs, mentioned Stafford Pond and Nonquit. It's my understanding that we do not own Nonquit, nor are we responsible for the services that come out of the Nonquit Pond, and that's the domain of Newport. And so, if it should be amended, I think it should read, we're responsible for 1 drinking water reservoir. And again, the question of liability to the town of Tiverton by specifically naming bodies of water and things that we don't own could point out issues for other people to come after us for.
Councilor Hilton or the attorney? Because she's shaking, you want to say something, right?
While certainly the city of Newport does in fact own the Nonquit Pond Reservoir, under the DEM regulations, our land use decisions, we are responsible for how our land use decisions impact that. And we would be, in the event that it was determined that our land use decisions had contributed to continued impairment of it. So we are responsible for it. And we're also responsible for it in that the city of Newport is a taxpayer here. They pay us $50,000 a year in property taxes.
They don't pay enough.
But, so we are in fact responsible for our land use decisions and the way our land use decisions affect that water body. So I would like to leave that in, because people do sometimes have the attitude, well, what do we care? We don't own that drinking water supply. Well, if we're forced to do an expensive remediation or install remediation because, it's our land use thing, it's a good thing for people to understand that, I think.
So just to clarify, you think that we might have to do expensive remediation on Nonquit?
I'm not going to say that we have to or are going to have to, but I am going to say this, that the DEM has regularly held communities responsible for their land use decisions that have impaired either drinking water supplies or coastal supplies, and they have the full authority to do that. So if DEM decided that the Nonquit area needed expensive stormwater remediation, they would have every right to tell us as a community that we have to do it. It's not any different than where they're forcing us to install sewers because they've determined that it's our land use in certain parts of North Tiverton that is contributing to the coliform bacteria in Secant River. They have the power to do that. So that's why it's important for us to remember that even though we don't draw water from that reservoir, we are responsible for how our land use decisions affect it.
I have a question for the solicitor. because Councilor Hilton raises a good point about us potentially having to do remediation, but I recall that when Newport was sued over their water, it was a reservoir in Portsmouth, Middletown, and they had to sink $80 million into it, and that's the City of Newport Water Department that actually sank the money into clean the water and have it coming out of the reservoir. Doesn't that set a precedent?
So I would say generally, and pretty much across the board, as far as monetary liability on the part of the town, you're not going to find monetary liability based on what you place in the comp plan. Now, I'm not familiar with the Newport case, but I'm sure if they had to pay $80 million to clean up their water supply, that was based on aspects of state law that was apart from their comp plan. Essentially, the comp plan gives you a space where you're going to carve out and say, this is where we're going to set our objectives. And that way, when the state or another landowner or residents in the town want to do a project, or that it will give the town the ability to say, back off, this is what we're going to take on. This is where we're going to have our autonomy. So by placing something in the comp plan, it's very unlikely that you'd be bringing on liability onto yourself. As far as, cases for monetary damages and that sort of thing, there's what they call a public duty doctrine, which is if you're doing something in your public capacity, like setting policy and passing legislation that only a public official could do, you can't get liability out of that. Now, consider the policy aspects. There may be varying policy routes that come up out of this based on what you place in here. What you do as a town may be guided by what you place in here, but I wouldn't be overly concerned with causing liability based on the comp plan.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up to that too, I mean, as we kind of flip through this section, we're talking about land use and, what we're going to do with the land and all that sort of stuff. And, I would think that we would have some sort of an economic impact action here with regards to developing, reviewing zoning for commercial property and, how we might be able to promote the growth of industry and some sort of economic impact on this town. But I'm a little disappointed because it seems like all we really talk about in land use is how we're going to protect the water and the trees and the rocks.
All right. Yes, Councilor Hilton.
I'd like to respond to John on that one. First of all, there are really in here, because in theory, if you're going to rezone things, whatever you say you're going to do in your comp plan, you're supposed to do within 18 months. So you got to pick some things. And out of the land use subcommittee for kinds of commercial things, there were really 4 things that bubbled up as priorities, I guess. And the first and foremost was the waterfront. So if you look in here, there's a section, and Action 3 on marine and waterfront uses, because many other communities generate significantly more revenue out of their waterfront than Tiverton does. And we have only one kind of waterfront zone, and it's actually sort of pretty restrictive. So the idea was, and Stu can help speak to this, to really evaluate the waterfront all the way from Nanaquacka Pond all the way to the north, consider different kinds of waterfront zones. There's some parts of it that are all totally developed residential and they wouldn't be disturbed, but other places where we could really try and grow commercial activity along the waterfront. So that was identified as a priority. And then, while this may come out, it may end up coming out, was item 7, which was to really look at the Sousa Road area as another place that we could consider, the possibility of different kinds of commercial activity, although it sounds like that might go away. And then, to really look at the industrial zones, because we've had a fair amount of activity in that area. The industrial zone has grown quite a bit. In the last few years, there are a number of new things that have gone up there. There have been some conflicts, but to look at that as another potential for, additional commercial development. Those were really sort of the big focus items. Those were the big three places. There are some other things in here, like to review the zoning that was done for Main Road, because the thought was it needs some tweaking in some places. So that's fairly new, but we've had it for a little while, and that could use a little bit of tweaking. One of the hard parts is that most of the kind of commercial development wants to see access to public sewer and public water. It's very hard to run a lot of larger commercial entities if you don't have public sewer and public water. So the focus has really been on areas where there will be public sewer and public water. I mean, it's hard to operate a hotel without a public sewer. I mean, so that was really the place that it was focused the most. But those were really identified as the priority areas. And at the same time, and it's a little discreetly done here, but it's here nonetheless. If we're trying to balance the delta between residential development and commercial development, then one of the things to do is to look at how much land you have left for houses and what that density is, and whether or not you should review that so it balances out a little bit better. And Stu, if you want to speak to more of this, obviously you can ask him, but given that it's sort of an 18-month zoning cycle, the land use subcommittee picked the things that they thought were the biggest potential priorities for additional commercial growth and put them in here.
Madam President, I have, I went for a building permit today, just for the zoning thing that's going on, okay? I texted, tried to find out what I can do with my other property. They allowed me to put single use with a commercial above, and we came up with a little emergency that came on. I needed to put a secondary apartment in, a second apartment instead of a business. And with the way we're zoned now, it's zoned walk commercial, well, I don't know, one of those crazy things that we...
Neighborhood. It's neighborhood, right?
I'm not really sure what it is at 404 Main Road, but I went to see Neil today to get a building permit to put an apartment on the second floor over there, and he said, no, you can't do it, you can only have a business. It's zoned, so it kind of, people, we own this property that we should be able to do, and I'm just using me because I went there today, but it's zoning, and I said, all right, well, fine, we'll put a business in, but it's just, it's broken up all over the place. You don't know what can do. Neil didn't even know what you could do. We had to go through and take a look at, through all the zoning and say, an hour or two later, well, no, you better not. No, it's not zoned for that. And that's the kind of thing that we need to clean up. And that's what's there right now, and I was told no today. No, you can't do that on your own property. It's not zoned for 2 apartments, it's zoned for 1 apartment and a business, which I knew it was never zoned for 2 apartments, but with this new zoning change and everything that went on, so apparently there's more to it, to the general guy in town that doesn't know what's going on, you know, so it'd be nice to get rid of some of that stuff to make it a flat line. Yes, you can, it's either your property, run it clean, leave it vacant, whatever. I mean, it's just, we need to make it a little cleaner.
Is this map accurate, this figure 5.2 existing zoning, Nancy? Or is that, am I inventing this in my own mind, that none of this has actually been codified?
What are you talking about?
The different zoning districts with
Well,
this?
mine was, it was this,
Form-based code.
Yeah.
Yeah.
has
Today's-
been approved
that's the
and
current
enacted,
zoning.
but
It's not codified.
Because it's a, yeah, no, because it would have to be a separate set aside under the tables that we have, and you're going to need some legal support to do that. That's one of the things I keep saying, you've got to
Right.
Yeah, we have no money for it.
rewrite, you're not, well, okay, there's your catch-22, but I'm telling you, that's what.
We need $1 billion in properties, in assessed property value in this town.
But when the homeowner can't do it,
It doesn't, it is enacted, and it's there, and it's in the ordinance.
right, and then according to
But it's
the,
not codified, because you would need two separate sets of tables and whatnot.
Right.
And remember, we've discussed this with the attorneys before.
Go ahead.
Could I respond to Councilor LeBeau?
Of course you can.
Action item 18 went in there to look at that problem that you just brought up.
it's going to clear it up.
So, well, I'm not going to guarantee you it's going to clear up.
Well, it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to
What I'm telling
me.
you is that it's been identified as an issue, so we put in action item 18 to look at, now that we have this main road with the mixed-use commercial, do we have the right ratio of commercial to residential density? We put that in there for the planning board to take that up and address that.
Yeah, that'll be a lot easier for property owners to
Again,
understand.
I mean, ultimately, the planning board will have to make a recommendation, but it was identified as an issue that came out of the last zoning that needs a tweak. So that's what action item 18 is, to look at that and see if it needs to be tweaked.
But we should keep that in.
Actually, yeah, but no one's in and take it out.
Keep that action
Yeah,
item in,
yeah.
of course.
I want to talk about something.
We definitely want to keep it in, and just as a point of clarification, we do have these 3 new hybrid zones that are part form-based and part Euclidean zoning, and they're called Traditional Main Street Pedestrian-Friendly District and Neighborhood Business. And I think your property is in the pedestrian-friendly destination district.
I think, I'm really not, we couldn't quite figure it out.
Last night, we had a planning board meeting, and one of the discussions that was raised by an architect on our committee, Melissa Hutchinson, is that there are some conflicts between between what is in the business zone now, the general business zone, and what is in the hybrid, and that we need to take a look at that to make sure that the hybrid can encourage exactly the type of thing that you were talking about, Randy, giving owners of properties in those 3 districts, which are basically North Tiverton and then Bliss Four Corners, giving the property owners the ability to do mixed use, commercial, retail, office, residential, and mix it up, because that's what we're trying to encourage. We're trying to encourage that kind of dense activity with a lot of pedestrian foot traffic to support the businesses, the retail businesses. So, and we agreed, the planning board agreed last night, that would be one of our top priorities for 2018. And in fact, we even talked about how to pay for it, didn't we, Susan? So.
Well, that's the way it's zoned right now, so it's mixed use right now.
But we're aware of the problem that you just mentioned, and we are working on it. And the action item in element 5 will help us focus on that. It sort of gives us the moral authority to go ahead on that.
Would it make sense to have an action item on here that takes a look at those hybrid zones and whatnot, and determine if they're even viable? I mean, it seems pretty confusing to me.
Well, they're kind of new. They definitely need some tweaks, so there are 2 things in here that are specific tweaks for those. One is the density issue of since they're mixed use, what is the right ratio of the business to residential? So that was one definite tweak that came out of it. The other big tweak that came out of it is that there are these weird nebulous design guidelines that are guidelines. And that's been an issue because not everybody has the guidelines applied the same way, and that it's not a great idea to have guidelines. We should either have standards that everybody sort of adopts or we don't, and that's the other thing that needs to be tweaked in there. So those are 2 things that went in here as specific maybe someday those zones, but I think they're worth giving a chance if we tweak them a little bit
So
to see if they work.
just a tad bit of history here. Up until the 1980s or so, basically the country was focused on what is called Euclidean zoning, where you separate the community into residential here, commercial here, industrial here, agriculture there, and build a Chinese wall between those different districts. In the late 80s, beginning with revitalization of some city centers like Baltimore, planners learned that there were enormous economic benefits to a community to mix those things up as much as possible, so that you didn't have a situation where in a commercial area, at night, everybody left because they were home in their, bedroom communities. To go back to the idea of some of the older cities where you had a lot of foot traffic and you had a lot of different things going on, commercial, business activities, professional activities, industrial activities, all going on in the same neighborhood. And I lived in a community, Arlington, Virginia, where I was also active on my Conservation Commission, and I saw firsthand how form-based zoning really changed neighborhoods in Arlington, in North Arlington in particular, and took neighborhoods that were kind of dying commercially, where there wasn't much street traffic, and the restaurants were not doing very well, the retailers weren't doing very well, and suddenly that just blossomed. Just go there and take a look, and it was because of form-based code. And that's what we're trying to do in Tiverton. So we're trying to make it easier for business owners and other property owners to do a number of different things, to have more options, not fewer options, because the old Euclidean zoning stopped a lot of, if you take a good hard look at how our general commercial zone is, the use table and the structure, there's not a whole lot you can do there. And so we want to give people more options, not fewer options. Peter, would you like to address that?
Oh, I was just scratching my head.
Oh.
Stu, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Because, obviously it sounds like the newer model that came out of the 80s with the mixed use and all that stuff is a good idea, but I guess it's more of a rhetorical question, because as we heard earlier tonight, as it pertained to action item 7, it sounds like, and it looks like, according to this map, the vast majority of this town is segmented between residential and agricultural, and then we have this area for commercial jammed over here, and it's like we're trying to do this little tiny sliver, which is barely indistinguishable on the map here, and it impacts only a very small subset of North Tiverton. The question I have is, if this is the way to go, and the way that we can revitalize the town and bring more businesses in and make everybody happy, then why the heck are we only doing it on a little piece of main road in the north part of town when we've got all this other land that we can do stuff with?
Well, we have to take this one step at a time, and so what we did a few years ago when we adopted this hybrid zoning was introduce this concept, and so it's a work in progress, and as we get more experience with it, we may be able to expand it more. But at the present time, we're still trying to make it work, and hence my comments to Randy a minute ago about addressing some of the problems that he's run into with it. So that's all I can say.
Thank you.
Barbara Pelletier, 104 Bonneyfield Drive. If you're addressing the really nitty-gritty of some of these zoning things, and I have mentioned this before, I think you should address the bed and breakfast. And Newport, in the last month or so, has had 2 articles in the Newport Daily News, and I photocopied them, and I actually gave copies for each of you to Nancy with a cover letter, and I don't know if you've received them for your packet.
I saw it somewhere.
Yeah.
Come on,
I saw it somewhere.
But it's interesting because people do buy houses in desirable lots, become absent landlords, and that can really undermine a whole section of a community. And if nothing else, it can make some neighbors upset that they're really living next to a hotel and there's absolutely no way that they know who's staying there. And in this heightened security kind of atmosphere, even if you sometimes check in a hotel overseas especially, you have to show them a passport, but here you've got people renting in neighborhoods with children and all of that, and you don't know who's next to you. And I'm not against it or anything like that, but I think that's something, if somebody in Newport has the problem of ladies and, one person buying a big house and renting it out as a party house and all of that, but I wonder if you can do something ahead of time before you have that problem.
And just to answer that, the part of the issue in Newport, having lived in Newport for 7 years, is that their ordinances specifically say no short-term rentals. You're going to be there for at least a month. So I know they've been trying to curb that for many years, but.
And a lot of these shorefront communities are now putting, a little Compton is working on it. Middletown, I think, has just passed stuff, but, so if you're going to get into that little nitty-gritty part of it, this might be a good time to do it.
Yeah, I mean, my concern is
That's in
just.
housing.
Yeah, that's in housing. I was
Section
to say,
six.
my concern on this is just, we need more area to develop commercial property because that doesn't, that has less of an impact on the town services, and you take in more money than you actually spend on those properties. And so my comment to Stu was more geared towards, we've got such small amounts of area that have been designated for these modified zones for mixed use, why are we not looking to expand that if that's the way to go? So, but I completely agree, and we'll jump into that stuff when we get to housing. So I'll keep a note of that.
All right.
Any other comments from the audience?
I'm sorry, I know that I
That's fine.
talk a lot.
That's all right.
Patty Seuss again. Well, just to speak to that, Councilman Edwards, I don't think, because correct me if I'm wrong, but we're talking about developing and looking at the zoning all down Main Road, which includes up where I live, my meager little North Tiverton, which people think I don't live in Tiverton because I live in North Tiverton, all the way down to the water, developing, changing the zoning and making it far more appealing and palatable so that we can keep what we love about Tiverton, why people come here, and then offer opportunities for people to dine, for people to do things without having to bring this gigantic magnitude of a swath of something that puts it down here, and then you leave meager areas that aren't even used to their best ability, to their greatest potential. You leave them sitting there rotting away while you take and try to do something humongous to fix a financial problem. We all know we have a financial problem, but that's not the answer to, I don't think we're talking about just North Tiverton. We're talking about all of Main Road, the waterfront, looking at the zoning, making it so that we can put things that are far more palatable and lucrative for our community that will bring people here so they can enjoy our natural resources and then go and enjoy some retail, some business, some entertainment. That's kind of what we're talking about. Am I wrong?
Madam President? I think you and I are on the exact same page, but if you read through this comp plan, that's not what this does. The whole form-based zoning code and everything literally addresses just a very small section in North Tiverton and doesn't touch anything else. And so that's the concern that I have.
It does a little bit of blissful corners.
Yeah.
Well, we got a little bit over here.
Right.
But I mean, it's.
And then the development
drop
of
in
the
the bucket.
waterfront. Right,
But it-
which encompasses a whole lot more than just North Tiverton and Bliss Four Corners.
If you look at this map.
Well, one of the really difficult things, and part of the reason that we focused on the areas that we did, is to go back to, it's hard to run other than, sort of a small mom and pop kind of things if you don't have public sewer and you don't have public water. And in this day and age, the kind of septic systems that DEM is requiring and the cost of those septic systems that they're requiring makes it really difficult. So, you know, we've got more public sewer coming, particularly on that eastern side of Main Road down to the waterfront, which presents real opportunity. You know, there are businesses that won't consider coming here because, unless they can connect to the sewer, because you just can't afford to put in that kind of septic system. And you can talk to some businesses on Main Road, and I can think of a couple that are great businesses that have septic systems that are nightmares and are really expensive. So, you know, the first best hope for bringing more business are places where we're gonna have sewer available. And, you know, the other part of this is that, you know, you look at South Tiverton, and we also have to be consistent with where the state's going with development. And the state has identified, you know, the north part of Tiverton as a place where they're willing to spend, if and when they have any, infrastructure money. They don't want to see development sort of sprawling. They want to see the development, or commercial development, or mixed development, things that require infrastructure sort of in a more contained way, not kind of sprawled everywhere. And the state has identified that North Tiverton is a place that, if and when there's any state infrastructure money, that's where they'd put it. They would never help us with any infrastructure money in the south part of town. They won't do it. So that's another, you know, good reason to focus on that. And, you know, to John's point, you know, we talked about this a lot, and actually, like, where can we find, you know, are there more places? But at the same time, one of the tricks for us is that, you know, Tiverton is heavily built out in a residential way. And it's not easy to go and say to certain portions of town, hey, listen, I know you all got houses here, but guess what? It's going to take time and, you know, to sort of grow that. And it is hard because a lot of the very best land for development in Tiverton has a house on it already.
Yeah.
I mean, it was developed as a bedroom community, and there just aren't that many great pieces of land that are close to public water and public sewer that don't have houses on them. You know, but again, Main Road east down to the waterfront from Nanaquacket north, you know, maybe we're taking the Sousa Road area off the table. That was a thought, but okay, we'll, you know, leave it the way it is. We have the industrial park, you know, the casino area at some point, but for now, the first step was the casino's gonna be there. That's a lot for the residents there to absorb. You know, we'll see next comp plan. But it is hard when so much of the very best has been already developed with houses.
And there's no parking.
And there's no-
Doesn't mean we couldn't incentivize them to sell and develop into something else, though, I mean,
Well,
I know somebody who wants to build something, his lawyer was up here earlier.
you know, I mean, that may happen in parts of the waterfront. It may be that there are some people who are, incentivized to sell. We'll see. I mean, we're giving it a try.
I just think we need to do more.
All right. Any other comments regarding this from the audience? Action 19,
I was gonna bring that up, but.
yeah,
All right, hold on.
it's to establish the planning department with a full-time
Oh, my
planner
God.
and a staff that support the work of a planning board and works in conjunction with all town departments. We are going to have to come back to this after we have our meeting to discuss what the town council wants to do with the planning department, which is going to be, Joan, you weren't here, but, Monday, but this will be at the budget meeting, where we have to decide what we're going to do with that whole department, and then we'll have to incorporate that in here once we make that decision. And Stu's shaking his head like, yes, he realizes that. I mean, it may stay like this, or it may change, so we have to remember that we need to come back to that. And, yep, go ahead, Trish.
Action 14, which is the low-impact development thing.
Yep.
Could we change that to have language that references the stronger language that's in the other chapter so that we don't have a conflict? Stu?
Yes, please.
And Peter is shaking his head, yes, we
I'm going to put Stu is going to do this next to that. Okay?
Stu, is that okay? Okay. Joan?
Yep. I just have a few comments. Starting with the industrial land uses, action 2A, 2B, 2C, and 2D. Just reading it, it seems to be in conflict with action item 6. Because whenever I read anything like this, consider rezoning, consider rezoning, consider rezoning, and put in here compatibility with the environment, it can make a case to rezone the industrial parcels to residential. So I think that it's a slippery slope on those. And I don't feel that anybody has to comment on that or support it. It's just a statement I'm making.
I'll support
Can I
you.
ask Joan a question?
Yep.
If that was changed, it said to rezone into low-impact industrial zones, would that make you feel better? So it made it clear not that it wasn't to change it back to,
Certainly, it can be tweaked, but as soon as I see consider rezoning, I automatically go to, okay, this gives them an opportunity to rezone it, change it from industrial to
Whatever.
something else.
Right.
okay, it's a good point, but it wasn't the intention, so.
Action 2D regards the quarries, and it says, to make them be consistent with regulations, but I don't think it really addresses the issue. We have a lot of inactive quarries, and I think there should have been something to focus on possible options for reuse, to just consider leaving the quarries there and say, okay, they need to meet regulation, does not help the situation. So I think there should have been something in there on that. I agreed with Action 7 to remove Action 7. At the top of, I see like different categories, like diversification of tax, town tax base, and then town parcels, then utility and infrastructure on Action 10. Then when I get to Action 11, and then goes all the way through to 15, I'm not sure that should all be under utility and infrastructure. I'm thinking that, should there be a different category for these? Because then you get to design standards for 16 and 17. So I don't know what category these 11 through 15 are.
Maybe watershed?
Huh?
Maybe a watershed category?
I'm just,
Talking more,
I'm just-
There's something, but
but they don't, it's following a pattern of identifying a category and putting action items to the category, but I don't see anything that's consistent for 11 through 15 to match up with the last category of utility and infrastructure. For number 15, I have a question, just review current allowable density regulations, and basically, and modify as necessary. Is that to modify the zoning, density regulations? I just want to be clear what it's modifying.
We'll be here.
density, but that's a good point.
Number 17, consider incorporation of design guidelines. I have a problem with the word guidelines. As has been mentioned before, there's standards and there's guidelines. Guidelines leave it open to interpretation, and standards are different. And I don't know if we should be continuing to incorporate guidelines that leave it open to interpretation. Hence the problem with Action 18 when we discussed the guidelines associated with form-based code. Action item 21, actually I have a question for Stu. This action item is consider a process to document pre-existing non-conforming uses, especially in cases where significant zoning changes alter the legal status of a property. And I read this and I'm like saying, okay, what is the end game for this? We do have properties in town, and we know that if they're pre-existing non-conforming or legal non-conforming properties, there are a wealth of issues associated with those properties. So once we document them, what is it that we need to do? The last line says significant zoning changes should include a well-publicized effort to assist property owners in documenting legal conforming status. But once they document the legal conforming status, what does that do? What is the end game? Does it help them?
The statewide planning tells us that, and I think just about any state would say the same thing, that a community's zoning should more or less reflect what's actually in existence in a community. And I think what happened in Tiverton over the years, maybe in the 70s and 80s, years ago, people got really nervous about dense development, and so they took whole swaths of North Tiverton, which were built at the turn of the 19th century to accommodate mill workers in the Bourne Mill and the Shove Mill and so on. They took those three-decker tenements that were very close together, took those whole neighborhoods and rezoned them R40, meaning that they are now pre-existing non-conforming. So whole neighborhoods of Tiverton have been turned because of, I think, bad zoning decisions. Zoning decisions where people thought, gee, we're preserving Tiverton's rural character. Well, North Tiverton never was rural, or hasn't been rural for 150 years. So we want to get away from a situation where so many properties in the town of Tiverton are pre-existing non-conforming, because that creates all kinds of legal problems. I would, I've tried to convince people down at Tiverton Four Corners that we should expand the village commercial district so that we give legal protection for all of those businesses. The village commercial district is tiny. It does not cover all of the commercial businesses at Four Corners, and so the people who are outside of that, they're legal non-conforming. And if anything happens to their property, and they try to go to rebuild after a fire, for example, they've got the same problem that the yacht club had. So I think that's what we're basically trying to get at here. And by identifying that, then we can get on with the job of actually making the zoning changes that will make sense. Because we don't want North Tiverton to go away. I would love to see those three-decker tenements become affordable housing units by being deed restricted. And we had a discussion about that last night at the planning board meeting. So that's, I think, basically, Trish, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what we were trying to get at in this action item.
Well, I think there were two things. The density thing was to address that, because maybe some of what we've turned into R60 shouldn't be, because as Stu said. But this piece a little bit was also meant to help people understand. We have a lot of pre-existing non-conforming in Tiverton everywhere, because the town's 300 years old. And then, but people don't know how to document what they have. So the idea was that we could help people learn how to document, what they are grandfathered and entitled to have, whether that's by taking some photograph or whatever, so that later on in the future, you know, if there's ever a question, their rights are documented, and that people aren't, you know, saying, well, I've been doing this for 50 years, and it was, well, now you got to prove it, right? So we're just trying to say that it would be good if there was a process that we could help people understand how to document any rights that they have as a pre-existing non-conforming, so that they don't find themselves in a position of, at some point, trying to prove to somebody that they have a right to do that. That was really it.
Right, but that only provides documentation. They're still going to be legal non-conforming.
Yes.
They still have restrictions on their property. They have, especially in what was R10s, were changed to R30s, so every time they have to do anything, they have to go for a zoning variance. So it puts a burden on those people who are pre-existing non-conforming, whereas before all this zoning came in, they were legal.
Right, but
So this doesn't put the next step in. What do you do once you have your legal status, and how do we get them zoned properly so that they're not non-conforming?
Under action item 15, which is to review the allowable density regulations in all zones, and yes, it talks about the infrastructure, but that is to review the density regulations in every single zone that we have. So ideally, at some point, the planning board will take up the R30 zone as part of this, and maybe they'll change that. I mean, we didn't.
Right, but you're focused on R30, you're going to change the requirements within an R30, but the property itself should have remained an R10, and there should be an R10, because those are small little properties, and they should have their own standards, which they originally had, because they were not, so now they're non-conforming. They will never be an R30, because they will never have enough acreage to be an R30. So it's a mistake. They were changed from R10s to R30s. They shouldn't have been. And all it has done is cause those properties to be identified as pre-existing non-conforming. And it puts a burden on them. Whenever they need to do something, they have to go for zoning relief. So
That's my interpretation of this.
So, Action 15 doesn't do that. Action 21 helps to identify the issue, but the next step in identifying an issue is to take an action on that issue. So this doesn't go beyond the point of, oh, we're going to document it, and this is a 10-year plan. So, okay, you're going to document it for the next 10 years, but you're not going to do anything with that information.
Well,
So I have a problem with that.
I don't think that the point of 21 was to fix that. The point of 21 for pre-existing non-conforming has everything to do with, there are certain properties that exist in town that are going to be pre-existing non-conforming for forever. They are old, they've been there for a really long time, and the zone around them is not going to change, and the only way to fix them would be to do spot zoning, which is illegal. That's...
Well, if you, and this is my comparison. So when the zoning was implemented in Tiverton, they did what Stu said, they put a block. This is a block of R30, a block of R40, a block of R60, a block of R80. But when you look at the comp plan for Little Compton, they did an evaluation of the properties. So their zoning doesn't look like big blocks of zoning. It looks like a checkerboard, because they took into consideration what the existing property zoning was, and matched the zoning of that property to what it was, rather than saying, all this property here is now R80, but in the middle of it, there was a commercial business. So that commercial business is legal non-conforming. And that legal non-conforming business can't expand without spending money. And they're restricted to their footprint. So it puts a burden on property owners, it took away their rights by making them pre-existing non-conforming. So I think this is a step in the right direction. Action 21 is a step in the right direction, and I know I've talked to Stu about this a few times, but there's a next step to this, to rectify a situation that was created when the original zoning went in. Because we shouldn't have hundreds and hundreds of properties that are pre-existing non-conforming, and then force those properties to go for zoning relief.
So what would be your next step then?
Next step would be to,
Because the first step is, okay, you got that, and so what would be a logical next step?
similar to
Fix it.
modify.
Yes, but how?
Well, we could
Modify.
just back it
No.
up to where it was before we did that change a few years ago, where we took their R10 and turned it to R30, whatever year back it was. I mean, it's all recorded history. It's
But
all-
if you document their legal status, then it's not spot zoning. You have it in
Right.
here and say, return them to their legal status.
Exactly, so it's only a couple of words in the document, you put a 21A, return those people to where they belong. Why should we burden those people? Let them have
That's what
that.
you're suggesting would be the next step.
Yeah,
Right,
that would be the next step. 21 fixes it, identifies it, 21A fixes it. Put it back to
Right.
where it was, so you don't put the burden on those people.
So then they become legal.
And it gives you 10 years till this thing comes out again, to get them documented, to get them deeded, to get it on their deed, where I'm an R10, I don't need to go in front of zoning because I want to change my window.
Certainly, you can put timeframes on this, say, okay, it's going to take X amount of years to do this analysis, but once the analysis is underway,
Yeah, because this is going to take.
phase it in, so that you don't run into everything has to be done in 18 months. Because you got to identify the legal status of the property, and then put that process in place to make them legal, is all I'm saying.
That's the best way to do it, just legal non-conforming stuff is a pile of crap.
It's not, it's difficult for those property
For
owners.
the owners, right.
No matter what zone they're in, it's difficult for those property owners.
Because they've already had, their benefit was there, we took it away by saying, now you're this, well,
I'm gonna say that I agree with the problem, but I'm not sure I agree that that is the solution. First of all, I think we're always gonna have some pre-existing non-conformings, and I'll give you an example. Supposing you have a pre-existing non-conforming junkyard that's in a residential zone. Do we want that to be a situation where they get to just expand by right? I'm not sure that you do, but I do think that they're entitled to have their pre-existing status confirmed and documented so that their rights to have what they have are protected to go forward. I'm not sure, I'm going to guess that and I could be wrong, but I'm going to take a ballpark that if you were going to take every residential zone in Tiverton and try and zone for what's on the ground, that we would probably end up, I'll bet you it cost us more than $100,000 to do that. I just do. In order to go through, when you think of the density especially in neighborhoods in North Tiverton, to go through and figure out which are like these are R10s and which ones are R30s, and and try and do that, and then do all the notification and all the public hearing and all the rezoning, I think it'd be really expensive. I do think that another way to address that, however, is to allow people who, even if, and there's a little bit of this in our zoning language now, but it's not that complete, which is to allow people to expand, to do, how do I put this? That they could do without having to get zoning permission, as though they were on a lot that was not pre-existing non-conforming. So in other words, if you had somebody who was in a lot that was 10,000 square feet, and right next door is a 30,000 square foot lot, and both of them have houses that are the same size, and the 10,000 square foot person now, if they want to add a deck, they have to go to zoning because they're pre-existing non-conforming, but the 30,000 square foot person doesn't have to. You can, and other communities have done this, put in your zoning language language that allows people the rights of expansion, even though their lot is undersized, as long as they're only getting the same rights of expansion that... Who just, what did you say?
The zone allows.
As the zone allows. Does that make any sense? So instead of trying to rezone all these properties, you instead leave the zone the way it is, but you give them their rights back as though they're on a on.
So they are conforming, you're changing them?
So that their lot is conforming. And you have to put it in your zoning language. Other communities have addressed it that way, and it would probably be a less expensive solution to get to the same endpoint. I think, maybe I'm gonna ask Peter, but.
Don't you think that might create a situation where we would become the middleman in neighbor disputes?
Which we already are.
Which we already are. I mean,
I think-
Well, certainly, there is information in the tax assessor's office that gives lot dimensions and what type of property it is, what is located on the property. So there is a wealth of information in the tax assessor's office on what the property is, what the property contains. And I just think that it's not so much you have to go to each location. We have the information.
just reset it.
Put parameters around it and say, oh, if the lot is this, then it's an R1, if it has a house on it. So certainly, we can
think
think of
about
other
this.
options and other, but I just want to bring it forward that this is not the end game that I foresee in this action item.
Control, alternate, delete.
All right, that's
Okay.
all I have for this section.
I think at this point, I'm going to reset, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. We got halfway through, believe it or not. We're probably going to need a third meeting at some point. But
You can continue to a date.
we already advertised for Saturday though, right? So that's not,
Advertise for the 20th.
so then Saturday, we could continue, right. I don't have to do that tonight, though. All right, so,
Do you need a motion to continue to the 20th?
no, we just, to adjourn because we already,
Motion to adjourn.
because we have a meeting. Do I have a second? Second. Motion made and seconded, all those in favor?